Hi folks, Lee Packett here, and you're watching The Business of Law, where we talk about the challenges and the opportunities facing today's legal profession. My guest today is Professor Hal Scott. He's a professor at Harvard Law School, and he's also the author of Connectedness and Contagion, a look back at the credit crisis of 2008 and Dodd-Frank. Professor, thank you for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So let's start from the beginning here. Why did you decide to write this book now?
Well, I decided to write it because I was worried about our ability to deal with future financial crises of the kind we had in 2008. Nobody else was speaking up about this problem, so I thought I should.
So what is the difference between, for the purposes of the financial system, connectedness, contagion, and correlation?
Well, connectedness is the idea if one institution fails, another will. So I think the best example of that during the crisis was the concern that if AIG failed, Goldman and other banks exposed to AIG would fail. It's sort of a chain reaction idea. Actually, that turned out not to be a major concern. The second kind of, I call it the three C's of systemic risk, correlation, is where you have one event, like a fall in housing prices, that has a profound effect on the number of institutions. We saw that in the crisis. The third is distinct. The third is a contagion, where people lose faith in the financial system. That happened after the fall of Lehman. Everybody thought no bank like Lehman would ever fail. Their expectations were upset. As a result, very quickly, there was a run on the system, and importantly, not just on banks, not even primarily on banks. It was on broker-dealers like Goldman, Morgan Stanley in those days, and on the money market funds. And so that's contagion. It's kind of an irrational panic that creates a run on financial institutions.
Now, you have said that DC's response to the credit crisis in its DoddFrank legislation is flawed. How so?
Well, I think what Dodd-Frank concentrated on was how to prevent another crisis. Okay, so looking at capital resolution and things like that, limiting risk, better management, etc. All those are good things. But at the same time, Dodd-Frank was passed in the kind of context of it was wrong to bail out Wall Street. And that term was used very widely. So as a result, Dodd-Frank limited the ability of the Fed to lend to non-banks in the future, put a lot of restrictions on them, took away the power of the FDIC to raise insurance limits during a crisis, which it did successfully in 2008. FDIC guaranteed any amount of transaction counts during that crisis. You can't do that anymore. And you recall the Treasury guaranteed the money market funds, and that power was taken away. And then third, of course, TARP, which was the last thing we did, where we try to recapitalize banks that were in difficulty. The authority to do that expired. Now, that may seem obvious that we should do that, but if you look over at Japan and Europe, they have what I would call standing TARPs. If you turn the right keys, if there's a real emergency, here's the program we have to deal with it. TARP expires, the new Secretary of Treasury would have to go back with his term sheet, like Paulson did in 2008 if we had another crisis. So those powers, which were absolutely crucial to dealing with the financial crisis, have gone away. And so our financial stability post-crisis is much worse. We've done a lot to prevent a crisis. Good, all right? Let's not kid ourselves. It's not the end of financial crises. And Brexit puts that in a very sharp perspective today.
Right, talk to me about that. We're recording this on the day where Great Britain is going to the polls to hold their referendum on exiting the European Union. Talk to me about how this specific story happening in Europe right now plays into the themes that you discuss in your book.
Well, it plays in directly because I would say there's an extremely low probability that a exit vote would trigger a financial panic the way the Lehman collapse did in 2008. I think that probably very, very small. I want to emphasize that. But if it were to occur, and by the way, people never thought Lehman would occur, if it were to occur, and there were a panic, okay, we would be much less able to deal with it over here in the United States. Now, ECB, the European Central Bank, would be able to deal with it. Bank of England would be able to deal with it because they haven't weakened their powers. In fact, I would say, if anything, they strengthened them after the crisis. But, the dollar is a reserve currency. We're leading economic power in the world. Whatever happens in Europe affects us, and whatever we do affects them. So our ability to respond adequately to a crisis is much diminished. And therefore, if Brexit were, and again, I want to emphasize extremely low probability, it would set off a panic. But if that were to occur, we would be in bad shape.
Talking to you about this issue at the moment, however, bring it back to Dodd-Frank. What should the United States government do with this legislation? Are you of the opinion that Congress should repeal Dodd-Frank?
Oh, no, none at all. I said that there are some that do believe that. I'm not in that camp by any means. I think Dodd-Frank did a lot of good things, strengthened the system, higher capital, better liquidity, better resolution, central counterparties that could go on and on. A lot of good things. So not for repeal of Dodd-Frank. What I would like to see is that these powers that we had before to deal with financial crises were restored. I'm not, holding my breath for that because it's toxic. Anybody in the government, in industry, anywhere else who would raise their hand and say, hey, we need to do that. Oh, you want to bail out Wall Street again? Toxic. So I don't think we're about to improve the situation. But coming back to your question, no, I think Dodd-Frank overall was quite good. But in this respect, it was very bad.
Looking at the upcoming election in the United States, do you see either of the two presumptive candidates as differing from one another in what they might do to further stabilize and strengthen our financial system?
Well, I'd say Trump is totally unpredictable about a lot of things, including this. He has not put out any, policy statement on financial regulation. I think Clinton kind of be more the same. Gary Gensler, who was the CFTC head and is basically heading financial regulation issues for the Clinton campaign, he's basically would continue Obama's policy. So I wouldn't see much of a change. On my issue, again, I don't think anybody wants to speak out and say we need to strengthen the powers of the Fed, FDIC, Treasury, et cetera, to deal with financial crisis because, you want to bail out Wall Street. That's politically toxic.
Professor Scott, you have a pretty good view at 35,000 feet of not only the United States financial system, but the global macroeconomic environment. Looking at all the potential blips on the radar, what's at the top of your list in terms of concerns? What keeps you up at night?
Well, this Brexit thing keeps me up. This contagion issue is the top of my list. Low probability, extremely high impact. But putting that aside, I would say it's the inability of the sort of most developed economies to deal with deflation or extremely low interest rates. I don't think, we've had the Bank of Japan doing massive things to try to deal with that, establishing negative interest rates, ECB following that, Fed quantitative easing, all of that is not working. And so what are we going to do to really restore the levels of economic growth that we want? I don't think anybody's got the answer to that, and the fact that they don't is very concerning.
Professor Scott, thank you for your time today, sir.
My pleasure.
That's Professor Hal Scott from Harvard Law School. He's also the author of Connectedness and Contagion. If you'd like to see more of the stuff we're working on, be sure to check us out at MimesisLaw.com. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. If you're listening to us as a podcast, do us a favor and write us a good review on iTunes. It makes all the difference in the world. If you're watching us on YouTube, do us a favor and subscribe to the channel. There's more good stuff coming. I'm Lee Pacquiao. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
Paul Figueroa, who has resigned, again, for personal reasons. Mayor Libby Schaaf down in Oakland is not telling us what's going on. She just keeps saying, I'm sorry, there's conduct that's wholly inappropriate for the police department here in Oakland.